is Totally 80s, the podcast dedicated to the music of the greatest decade ever. So, turn up your Walkman, loosen that scrunchie, and get ready to talk 80s with your host, Lyndsey Parker.
Hi, I'm Lyndsey Parker from Yahoo Entertainment and SiriusXM Volume, and welcome to another episode of Totally 80s. If you're enjoying this podcast, why not take a second to follow us at Totally 80s on Facebook and Instagram, and email us your comments and show ideas to podcast@totally80s.com. Just a reminder, if you want to see our faces, you can also catch this episode on video on our Totally 80s YouTube channel, so head on over there. And joining me today, as always, is my partner in all things 80s, John Hughes. The other John Hughes, of course.
Lyndsey, we had so much to talk about that it spilled over, and I don't mind having a two-parter on this because I think this episode's way overdue.
I mean, absolutely. Obviously, we had Darone Bowers on. We're going to welcome him back in a moment to talk about 80s hip-hop, rap in the 80s. And perhaps we were being a bit naive to think we could cram that all into one podcast. I mean, that's a pretty wide-ranging topic when you think of all the directions that hip-hop went in the 80s, all the different movements, all the different amazing artists and record labels. So we went into overdrive and overtime last time, so we're inviting Darone back. So once again, encore presentation, our special guest today, yay, Darone Bowers, who has worked in A&R for several major record labels, most recently Rhino, and is an expert in all things 80s hip-hop. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, I'm glad to be back, you guys. How you doing?
Great. I'm excited to dig back into part two, so let's get started. We've talked about a lot of the artists like Run DMC, Salt and Peppa, LL Cool J, who sort of really broke through and became really mainstream and as big as any rock star or pop star of the 80s. And then it just continued. And a lot of although there were hard-hitting artists that really broke through, like NWA and Public Enemy, who I'd like to talk about in a minute, there were some that I think, for lack of a better term, like they broke through because they were kind of like cuddly or like non-threatening, or like the one that comes to mind, everybody loved The Fresh Prince. When Parents Just Don't Understand came out, which was pretty much about a suburban experience. I mean, it was about two things: shopping for clothes, for back-to-school clothes at the mall with your clueless mom, and stealing your parents' car, which happens to be a Porsche, and joyriding it around your neighborhood, and then getting mildly in trouble for it. Like, you know, this was a very like kind of like, I mean, you know, they were jokey and they were cute, and the video was very cute. And of course, Will Smith, then known as the Fresh Prince, was like incredibly charismatic. You can see him laying down the acting career in the video. So I think about him. I think about Biz Markie and Just a Friend. I think about Tone Loc. I think about Young MC, who had, you know, Bust a Move, but also like Principal's Office. That was about, you know, like goof it off in school. Like, it seemed like there was this era. Delicious Vinyl was a big part of it in the late 80s. I mean, it was very mainstream and it was very like lighthearted.
It was very safe, yeah.
Good songs. I mean, Bust a Move is a classic for me in particular. I love that song. I love the bass line in it, the flea for the Red Hot Chili Peppers does. But like, can we talk a little bit? Oh, and then of course, MC Hammer. We haven't even, you know, like that was just, he had a cartoon, you know, Hammer Man, which I have on VHS. It's not very good. I don't recommend. But yeah, it's an interesting artifact. But like, things just got to this huge level of like very mainstream, but not particularly edgy.
Well, yeah, it's when Top 40 started embracing it a lot more. But like you just mentioned, the Fat Boys, it had been around since at least the mid 80s. You had Jam on It, Nucleus. I mean, that is probably one of the funniest, funkiest, greatest songs ever. That everybody loved that song. It didn't matter, but it never crossed over because there was still resistance at Top 40. It really took, you know, however we feel about them, it really took the Beastie Boys to get that crossover happening to Top 40 and Run DMC with Walk This Way. So that, I don't want to call it novelty rap, but really accessible, mainstream leaning songs, they were around before they actually entered the Top 40, I would think.
Yeah. I think with novelty rap, and one that stuck up in my mind was Joski Loves Pee Wee Herman Dance. Remember that? That was, I think, what was so cool about early novelty records like the Fat Boys, the Joski Love, the Nucleus, the Boogie Boys with Fly Girl, with records like that. What I love about all those groups and earlier was they were actually good rappers. They were skilled. Some of them had battles they went through. what you would call like how can I say it? The litmus test of becoming a rapper back then. Like you really had to rhyme, you really had to been in some type of battle. You've had to have some type of background to be considered a real rapper. All those guys did. Nucleus were breakdancers, and they all had this hip hop culture thing down. So all those guys were either affiliated or they came through the culture in a good way. When DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince broke, the reason why to me they set the path for Delicious Vinyl was you had these two guys from Philly that they weren't that. They weren't the street rappers. They weren't the culture rappers. They were two kids who could rhyme, but they were playful. They didn't want to be that serious. They didn't take life that serious. So you gotta remember the Rock the House album that had Girls in the World, There's Nothing But Trouble, and it had the one record that sampled I Dream of Jeannie. They were very playful. They were very cool. And I don't think it was the fact that they were trying to get to another audience. They just wanted to be different. And if you really think back, even if you go to rock music, pop music, funk, the most successful artists in those genres just wanted to be different. They didn't want to do what everyone else was doing. So that's when that happened with DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. On that same album that had Parents Just Understand, they had Brand New Funk. And I bring that up, I defend Fresh Prince all the time with that song. Like, okay, yeah, but listen to Brand New Funk and tell me that he's not an MC, that he wasn't just doing his thing. If he was another one, they were managed by Rush Management. So Russell and Leor managed DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. What was their first tour? The Public Enemy tour. They were on the It Takes a Nation tour. So
really?
Yeah, yes. They were on, if you look at, I want to say the Brand New Funk video in a tour bus, you'll see Def Jam artists on that tour bus. That was the tour they were on. Rush, even though they had Def Jam, Rush Management had deals with Jive, with Houdini and DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince, Def Jam, and Profile with Run DMC. So sometimes they will all be on one bill together, going around the country on the bus. That was their first tour. So these guys could actually rap, but they were different. And they were always respected of being different. When Delicious Vinyl came, they brought the laid back, and you definitely can feel this music, that laid back West Coast, LA, Venice Beach, chilling on Crenshaw type of vibe. That's what Delicious Vinyl brought. With Tone Low Key was, I think he was a house robber, and he was a low key gangster. And when he did Wild Thing, which, if I'm not mistaken, was written by Young MC. When he did that, it was just something being fun. He just wanted to do something different on a story, and he didn't want to be on the coattails of NWA that was going at the time, even though he could have very easily done that. When Young MC had a shot, not out both his #1 record, I came out with my own record, it was the same thing. And not only was it safe for kids, my mom threw away my 2 Life Crew and NWA tape. She didn't throw it away. She took it to work and she sold it. And she hasn't paid me back since then.
That's even
she didn't want me listening to that.
At least, she might as well be enterprising about it.
Man, she took it to work and sold it. She was like, yeah, I got lunch with those cassettes. I was mad. But she let me buy Loaf After Dark. She let me buy Stone Cold Diamond by Young MC. So it was acceptable for parents to buy. And of course, if it was acceptable for my parents to say yes, mainstream America ate that up. The first Grammy for rap came from DJ Jazzy Jeff, Fresh Prince. Parents just don't understand. So that meant that the Grammy board, which leans on an older rock pop demographic, loved that record too, to the point where we can make a category out of it. And they beat Public Enemy, JJ Fad, Salt and Pepper, and another artist, and they won. So that right there kind of told the story of where rap was going.
I was just going to say, I do remember that I believe it was 1995. There was one year where at the point the Grammys had embraced rap enough to have 2 categories, best recording by a group, best solo, where women won it, like Queen Latifah and Salt and Pepper won it in the same year. Awesome. Yes. So that was a good year.
They won for None of Your Business, and Queen Latifah won for UNITY. So not only did they win, but they won for very positive female-driven records. That's probably one of the best Grammy rap moments, to be honest with you, because not only did they give it to females where there wasn't a female rap category, they wanted, again, just for being who they were and standing head and shoulders with these guys. Yeah. So it was a long path, but with the novelty rap, it was a thing of people being different, to taking these safe guys doing this. And then when they saw that Young MC outsold every rapper at that point, MC Hammer came into the picture. And the thing that was so awesome about MC Hammer that a lot of people don't know, MC Hammer is what we like to call a grown man. He was a grown man. He was not a kid like the rest of them. MC Hammer was in his late 20s, if I'm not mistaken, when Let's Get It Started came out. And he brought the James Brown, Michael Jackson theme to his videos, and it all started with the videos. He was dancing his butt off with background dancers that was from the streets of Oakland, and these party records with these samples. He did what everyone else was doing, but again, did it in a very West Coast California way, and it went through. And then there was this monster of a record called Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him that just broke history. That was it. That was like to this day, the only rap album to sell 10 million copies in 1 year.
Wow.
They actually did it in 1 year.
People like to forget that first record, the actual re-release of his first record, where, Turn This Mother Out. I mean,
that's a great one.
Yeah, he had some credibility. He wasn't seen as a joke. He was seen as,
I kind of feel, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons why he started to have less credibility it was this era where people were not necessarily, it was a murky legal area when it came to sampling. And because You Can't Touch This was so heavily based on the Super Freak sample, it's a similar thing to Vanilla Ice and Queen, and Under Pressure, where it was very built on a sample. And if I'm not mistaken, the Queen and Rick James were not given co-writing credit initially, or even just given credit like that. I think that turned off, going back to what we're saying about rock purists in particular, to sample Rick James or Queen and not make them a co-writer on the song. That's what I remember. I remember when people were turning on MC Hammer, they were like, this is a ripoff of Super Freak. He basically is just rapping over Super Freak, and that turned a lot of people off. That's how I remember it.
He was also an easy target. I mean, you had people like NWA, Third Base, who saw themselves as more socially conscious, and you had this guy doing party songs, and it's like, that's whack, that's lame. Why are you doing that? I look back at Third Base. I'm embarrassed for Third Base. If they're not going to be embarrassed for themselves, I will be embarrassed for MC Search.
One of the MC Search and Yo-Yo were the judges on a reality show on VH1 that I enjoyed very much, called The White Rapper Show. And then they also were on. And then Miss Rap Supreme, where they were looking for the next femc. I loved both those shows. But I remember, am I wrong? I remember Third Base having some cred back in the day. Is this revisionist history in my mind?
Darone, jump in. But
it is? Okay.
Third Base was managed by management, and they were signed to Def Jam. That gave them automatic credit out the gate. And the Step Into the AM was the first record. I remember seeing a video before I heard the record, and it's like, these white boys can rap. And they were different than BC Boys. BC Boys was very punk, party, and they could rap with the Rick Rubin 808. Third Base took the Def Jam formula and rapped over it. And it didn't seem contrived. It didn't seem like they were trying to be something they weren't. They were just really like that. But then when they did the Gas Face, which dissed MC Hammer, tell you why that happened. They kind of picked up the slack from Run DMC. MC Hammer's first single that popped off that I heard was called Turn It Up. That was the first video. And in the video, they were dancing and they dissed MC Hammer. I'm sorry, they dissed Run DMC in that video. In that song, in that video, they dissed Run DMC. And that was a real big thing. So instead of Run DMC answering, Third Base answered. And that's why they dissed MC Hammer. Third Base was basically carrying Run DMC's beat. So then when Hammer's second album came out and just shot through the stratosphere and there's nothing you can do, and a side story, Third Base, they did a visit to LA, a promo visit. They did KDAY, and MC Hammer heard that they were up there. MC Hammer called up to the radio station and threatened Third Base and told them they wouldn't make it to their car because they thought MC Hammer was this pop guy, when in actuality, MC Hammer's not a street guy, but he's street affiliated from Oakland. Oakland's not the Valley. So when they came at him, he had gangsters and friends and everybody waiting to take those guys out. There was a real known street industry connected guy named Michael Concepcion that Russell and Leor had to make a call to save those guys, but they weren't going to make it to the airport. Hammer was going to smooth take them out. So then when the next Third Base album came out, their target was Vanilla Ice, which is a much easier target at that time.
That was that was my problem with Third Base, is they really swung for the easy ones. It's like, you guys, you know, if you guys want to really do something. But, you know, the Hammer is a target, Vanilla Ice is a target. Great.
Oh, John, we got back up for a second. You said you had a crazy story. I want to make sure you tell it.
Fly Girl by the Boogie Boys, 1985. Junior year of high school for me. That was the song. And then not even a year later, Sly Fox, Let's Go All the Way comes out, which completely rips the beat from a Fly Girl. They have the huge top 10 hit, top 5 hit, whereas the Boogie Boys has another minor hit, kind of fades into the distance. And, you know, there they are, one hit wonders, whatever you like. Flash forward, November 1988. John Hughes goes into Army basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I'm there with the entire platoon of about 30 guys. You get to know each other. You're spending 24/7 together for 8 weeks. And about the third week, I got to be known fairly as the music guy, because I knew everything about music. And so people were like, what's this song? Well, I don't remember, because you don't have music. You don't have a Walkman with you. You don't have anything. It's basic training. So you're kind of like singing and making things up as you go along, and people are like, oh, I remember that song. And about the third week, there's a really cool guy there that I knew, and it gets me over to the side, you know, during some downtime. He goes, I know you love music. I got to tell you something, but I need you to keep it a secret because I don't want anyone to find out. I'm like, uh-oh, no, where is this going? And he says, I was in the Boogie Boys. And I'm like, wait, the Boogie Boys, like a Fly Girl Boogie Boys? And he goes, yeah, you know me as Stroman, but my name is William Stroman. And I'm like, oh, really? And he goes into his locker and he pulls out a Boogie Boys cassette. And it's the cassette, and he unfolds it and he shows me. And it's him on the cover. It's friggin' William Stroman, who's in basic training with me right now at Fort Knox. And I'm like, he's not lying. I can tell you that 1,000%.
That would be a really specific lie. You'd have to really go out of your way to make that up.
And why ask me to keep it a secret?
Yeah.
And so he had gotten out, or, you know, he had lost a lot of money after the Boogie Boys. I can't honestly remember why or what happened, but he ended up having to join the Air Force. He was in the Air Force for a couple of years, got out of the Air Force and decided, you know, I'm going to try the Army now. So he was like super nice and super intelligent and really gave me a lot of cautionary tales about the music industry before I was in it. And he was the greatest guy. And so I asked him, I had the opportunity. I said, did you guys get any money from Sly Fox? Because you guys were on the same label, Capitol. Did they work anything out with you? And I think they got a little money, like a one-time payout, but he was really bitter about what happened to him. And years later, I'm out of the Army. It's late 90s. I thought, you know, I got Facebook, Friendster comes around. I think it was Friendster, MySpace, whatever it was.
The story gets even better that you reconnected with him on Friendster.
I'm going to find William Stroman because I remember him. He was a great guy. He died of cancer. Aww. I know. And I found out by trying to find him. I had a blog called Lost in the 80s back then. I wrote this really nice story, what I just told you guys, a tribute. And a couple of his family members replied and said, you know, hey, thanks for remembering him. He was a great guy. But what a random, bizarre story.
Super random.
You know, I went to basic training. With,
I didn't even know you had this Army pass. This is like a whole other podcast we got to do some other time because that's a story. But to get back... So we were talking a bit about novelty rap or rap that was like a little more family friendly or less edgy, more PG rated. And it seems like, you know, we've talked about disco before, you and me, John, when we talked about like when 70 artists went new wave. And disco had a short shelf life, and then it kind of had a backlash when like there was Disco Duck by Rick Dees, and like everybody was doing a disco record. And it seemed like rap was in danger in the later 80s to early 90s of going in that same direction. There was rap in like diaper commercials, and there was like rapping Rodney and rapping this and rapping that, and like rapping on Sesame Street. And there was, a lot of novelty records, and, it could have gone that way. But instead, it went absolutely the other way. And as I mentioned before, to this day is the most popular musical art form on the charts right now. So I'm curious, Darone, like what made it sort of come back from the brink of being that self-fulfilling prophecy of being just a fad, just a flash in the pan that a lot of the naysayers had said it was going to be? Was it the fact? I would argue it was the fact that artists like Public Enemy and NWA and, these very credible and very serious artists were coming up around the same time. But I'm curious for your take on it.
I think that 100%, that's why. I think hip hop always samples. They were always rapping over samples. And like you said, rock never gave that a real credit because they looked at it as another disco, because sometimes disco was the exact same beat. You just put a little something more to it, and people, they would make 8-12-minute versions of just the same beat, and they took hip hop as the same thing. But when around 87, 88, when Eric B. and Rakim, Public Enemy, even more serious LL Cool J came, and then when NWA came, it became more social. And on a critical artistic level, the music got better. When Public Enemy dropped It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, that was the first time I even paid attention to a Rolling Stone magazine, because they were going nuts over that. And I couldn't get it at the time. So I'm like, well, this is Public Enemy. Like the videos were also Night of the Living Bassheads is one of my favorite videos of all time. And they were, again, speaking on what I was already going through in the inner city. That's what they were doing. But as I got older, I realized that, okay, that's what I'm going through. There's a lot of people that's not. And they ended up being what Chuck D said. They ended up being the CNN of hip hop. And hip hop ended up being the CNN of the streets. It became a reality rap thing. Everyone wants to say it was gangster rap. It's reality rap. They started saying things that people had no idea was going on. When Straight Outta Compton came out, and the first single, the very, very first single, Straight Outta Compton, but then when they got popular for F the Police, that just shook everyone to its core, because it was always a uniform thing of you respect the police, they help you across the street, they fight bad guys, they're the ones that law and order, you can call them, you can always rely on them. And here come these kids out of Compton saying F the police, and this is why. And mainstream America was like, oh my God, they're just so disrespectful. But people started echoing that and saying, yeah, this is actually what happens. That's exactly what happened. You have people cheering and ready, and the record started selling even more and more. The more the government and the FBI warning came out, the more people wanted to buy it. And that's how mainstream kind of works. When Dee Snider went and was fighting for that parental advisory sticker and all those things, their record sales went up. So it was the same thing with NWA. They brought a social message to it. And then it also helped that the Bomb Squad and Dr. Dre were making some of the most innovative hip hop music ever. With the Def Jam era, you had, again, Rick Rubin with Rock on Top of 808. You had Larry Smith with the 808 and the different drums. And then with Salt and Pepper, when they did Shake Your Thing, they started putting go-go music into it. The Bomb Squad was taking the rock elements, making it a little bit more intense, and the way they set up their drums was just exciting. It was a very exciting type of music, to the point that if they had put out an instrumental album, I think they probably would have sold more records. So rap became more of a powerful voice, along with Fresh Prince, along with MC Hammer, along with Salt and Pepper. And when you take a look back, hip hop became a genre because it was a variety of things instead of just being this one thing.
I would actually argue, I would say that was around the time when, hip hop kind of became the music of rebellion and social change instead of rock. When we think about the 60s or the 70s punk scene or whatever, we thought, the voice of the youth, the voice of youth rebellion, of revolution was rock music, especially in the 60s, and definitely the punks in the 70s. But sometime in the 80s, it changed where like rock started to seem kind of safe. If you look at what was on MTV around the same time, it was like Poison and, you know, stuff like that, which I like as well. But it was definitely not very socially forward or socially conscious. It was more escapism and not very scary anymore. You know, you joke about like parents not wanting certain records to be bought and your mom selling certain records, but there were people that were scared of this music, but in my opinion, in a good way, like in a way that's a healthy way to be, you know, because music is for young people. Like, you know, parents aren't supposed to understand, to quote the Fresh Prince. So would you agree with me on that it sort of became the culture driver for in that way?
It did. And thank God hair metal came, because when hair metal came and a lot of purists kind of abandoned rock and started listening to the older punk rock and things like that, hip hop came and took that space. And it did. It started to take that space, but it was well-rounded, where you had your Sex Pistols, you had your Clash, you had, to a point, you had Blondie and Talking Heads. We had Public Enemy, NWA, EPMD, Ice-T. We had a variety too. What happened with us, with hip hop becoming real, was what you guys had in Guns N' Roses and Nirvana, where Guns N' Roses came and they did rock the right way with a t-shirt and a shirt tied around them, and then Nirvana came and looked like they haven't bathed in like 3 weeks, and the music kind of reflected, and it spoke to another area of youth, and it rose. You had hip hop rising, Guns N' Roses bringing rock back, and Nirvana bringing another mode of it back. And I think things have not been the same since then, to be honest with you. Everything changed after that.
I have never heard the theory that the rise of hip hop was directly related to the rise of Poison. But you know, I'm all for that theory. But to end things, since we're talking about sort of the transition to the 90s and the alternative rock explosion that happened, and concurrently with that, there was an explosion or a growth of what now we would call alternative hip hop, but at the time might have been called backpack rap or rucksack rap if you were in the UK, which is, you know, like De La Soul, Farside, Tribe Called Quest, Digital Underground, PM Dawn. I would even say put the second very phenomenal Beastie Boys record, Paul's Boutique, in that category of that movement. Can we talk a little bit about how, as rock in the late 80s to early 90s was transitioning to this like alternative college rock explosion, like hip hop had its similar parallel movement?
That movement was driven by two things. I would say three. And it was going back to Run DMC. It kept evolving, how Run DMC was different than the Bambatas and the whole Sugar Hill movement. And then Arabian Rakim and Big Daddy Kane was different than what Run DMC was doing. When De La Soul came out in 1989, that was different than what NWA and Public Enemy was doing, because these were kids that, one, were kids, they were high school kids, they dressed different, they talked different. They almost purposely did it different so they wouldn't be typecast as what was really killing everything at that time, in a good way. The more reality angst rap. They came in, they were playful, they had the Daisy Age, which they ended up hating the next album, but it was a mixture of the 60 hippies kind of thing with the novelty rap, but they had actually rap skills like the Rakim and the Big Daddy Kane. So it was a perfect combination. So that was 89, and it was the Native Tongue Crew. That was the name of it. It was Jungle Brothers came out. De La was even bigger than them. Tribe ended up being bigger than them. Queen Latifah was in that family too. Black Sheep was in that family. And they all came together and created this alternative to what was going on at the time. And a lot of times when it happens like that, it's just a bunch of kids that want to be different. It didn't take anything away from NWA and Ice Cube and Public Enemy. They coexisted. The other alternative was it was very Black Power centric. So that's where the African medallions came from, the dreadlocks and the kind of African hobo dance and everything like that. It was an alternative to it. We were able to express ourselves more because of what NWA did. We had a bunch of kids who stayed in the suburbs. There was a lot of Black kids in the suburbs, and they were going to make their own music too. So that's what went into the 90s and drove that. But what a lot of older people now complain about rap music is it was more of a balance, and that's true. And I think that's because of the gift and curse of hip hop becoming a business. when they started going from millions to billions, thanks to that 10 million Peace Hammer on Hurt 'em album, it turned into a real major business and started to drive the way everything goes. And that was the difference now than then. But then it was just, everything was building and everything got fair airplay. De La Soul got just as much airplay as Ice Cube's It Was a Good Day.
It was a golden age. It was a golden decade. And as we look back on that decade, you know, we can see so many artists today that all, you know, whether it's the sensitive rap of I Need Love or the backpack rap or the reality rap or the party rap, it all goes back to this amazing time. And I've had an amazing time speaking with you, Darone. I mean, my God, I mean, I think we covered so much. There was so much to dig into. And thanks to your expertise, I think we really covered a great gamut of such a wide-ranging genre and such a wide-ranging decade. So a special thanks to you. It was really wonderful speaking with you. Yay, we're applauding.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for inviting me, man. I love talking about where things come from. Because kids today think that whatever they listen to, that's where it started. So it started with Drake. And Drake was the first one to do sing-songy rap, where no, it actually started in 87, 88. So I love having conversations like this. Thank you so much. And anytime you want to talk, I'm here.
We'll definitely have you back because this has been a real treat. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Lyndsey Parker, and I've been joined today by Darone Bowers and, of course, the other John Hughes. We want to thank you all for listening. Remember to give us a rate and review on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll catch you next time.
This was Totally 80s, the podcast dedicated to the music of the greatest decade ever. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Totally 80s, and please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until our next episode, catch you on the flip side.